Once again to lockdown in lockdown. I'm still feeling a bit poorly, banging headache all day, and well, it's like not even lunchtime yet, but all night and all day, and there's still the same cough. It's just a cold, so don't worry. But thank you for those of you who expressed your concern and gave me your best wishes. That's very, very kind of you. Yeah, it's just a cold, but yeah, still grotty. I hope you're all right. I hope you're enjoying our journey through the Escape from Furnace series. This will be probably only 2 chapters today, but you know what? That's still quite a big chunk of the book we've read. And yeah, Alex, in the last couple of chapters, Alex, who is in solitary confinement, is exploring the cell that he has found himself in. It's a very small space. No light, no sound really once you're in there, which leads to some very vivid hallucinations. He's been tormented from some people from his past. And he is feeling pretty desperate. However, he has managed to get the grill off the floor. The grill was basically the toilet off the floor. And that's something. It's a small victory against his cell. The other thing he's heard is screams. Screams coming from right outside. Screams that don't really belong in a place like solitary confinement, or shouldn't really belong. Not the screams of prisoners, but the screams of something else. So, yeah. He's about to see what happens to him next, I guess. Oh, sorry, I don't feel myself today, but you have to put up with me. Okay. Communication. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because I was woken by another noise. I sat up, thinking for a split second that I'd gone blind before remembering where I was. There was an unpleasant feeling in my gut, like someone had twisted my stomach around and then pinched it in place with a bulldog clip. It was probably hunger. I had no idea how long I'd been here, but it must have been more than a day. The noise didn't repeat itself, but I could have sworn it had come from the direction of the toilet. I shuffled my body around, too used to the pain to really bother with it, and lowered my head to the opening. Nothing. Maybe I dreamed it, given what had been going through my head last night, or morning or afternoon, whatever it had been. Another weird noise didn't seem unlikely. I realised I needed the hole for something else, and did my best to squat over it in the darkness. I never thought I'd miss the stained hunk of metal that had been our toilet back in the cell up top, but right now, as I tried and failed to hit the target, I would have traded my eye teeth for it. As I crouched there, wondering what to do about toilet paper, a muffled clank rose up from beneath me. I turned and put my head as close to the floor as I could bear, holding my breath to better hear if the noise came again, as well as for the more obvious reasons. It did. Another sound, like metal on metal. Without warning, something in my heart lifted. I scrabbled around the tiny floor and found the grill, smashing it as hard as I could against the wall. The noise it made was loud, but it didn't sound like the one I just heard. I poked a finger down the hole where the grill had been set and felt a pipe with a ring of iron or steel around its lip. There was another clank, and this time I answered, lifting the grill above my head and smashing it down against the ring of metal. It hit with the sound of a muffled church bell, and I dropped it, putting my hands to my ears to try to stop the ringing. Behind the whine of my eardrums, the noise came again, followed by a pause long enough for me to know what to do. I snatched up the grill and struck, softer this time, just once. A few seconds later, the sound from the pipe came twice. Dong! And I echoed it. Bong, bong! Then 3 times, followed by 3 strikes which I belted out with choked sobs of relief. "Z!" I said, more to myself than from any hope he'd hear me. "You genius!" He'd obviously managed to pry his grill off too, and had thought to smash it against the iron in the toilet. The sound was travelling down, then up again, making it seem like it was coming from right beneath me. I yelled in celebration, and this time rapped out the 5 notes of shave and a haircut. Dun, 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 dun. Even before the echo had died in the pipe, Z's dun, dun, burst through it with glorious clarity. I collapsed back against the wall, giggling helplessly. It seems like a stupid thing to be so happy about, but those tiny taps broke all the hold that solitary had over us. They punched through its one power, its only strength, its ability to keep us isolated, locked away from the world. It wasn't much, and we wouldn't be using it to discuss the next World Cup or who our favourite Hollywood babe was, but it was enough. I wasn't alone anymore. This time, so overwhelmed by enthusiasm, I raised the grill to my mouth and kissed it. Ooh. Keep your mind busy. Keep yourself occupied. Find things to do. If you're doing things, then you still exist, right? Right, I said, remembering Donovan's words. Well, remembering the words spoken by the piece of my subconscious that was masquerading as the memory of Donovan to stop me crumbling into depression. It's weird how complicated things can get when you're on the edge of madness. I'd been keeping my mind busy for what seemed like forever, Z too, as we tried to work out a system of communication. He'd started by tapping out short clacks, then longer ones, and I guessed he was doing Morse code. I'd never really gone to scouts or anything like that, so all I could do was repeatedly bang my grill against the pipe in frustration, until he got the hint. It would have been easier if we had a 1 hit for yes, 2 for no system, but we had we had no way of asking questions, so it was impossible. We spent quite a bit of time just tapping meaningless staccato tunes, not really caring that we weren't forming words, just happy to hear each other. At least I was tapping out nonsense. For all I know, Z was coming up with a master code that I just wasn't grasping. There was a moment, sometime after we'd discovered each other, where he did seem to be creating a system of taps. I listened carefully, trying to work out the code. There were 5 clear taps, followed by 5 more. Then a pause. Next, there was 1 tap, followed by 5. Another pause. Then 1 and 5 again. I tried to work out what it might mean, but it was probably something he'd seen in one of his damn documentaries, and I didn't have a clue. After racking my brains for a while, the only thing I could think of was that he was using numbers to stand in for letters, but that only spelled E-A-E-A, and unless he was being tortured and letting me know he was screaming, it didn't seem to mean anything. My own confusion gave me an idea. Waiting until Z had fallen silent, I smashed my grill against the pipe 8 times, 1 for each letter up to H. I paused, then brought it down 5 times. E. Twice I smashed out 12 dull, battered notes. L, L. My fingers aching, I finished off with 15 clear, steady hits. O. Silence. I chewed my nails in anticipation, spitting violently when I realised what I was doing. There was no time to think about it, though, as Z's response drilled up the pipe with all the subtlety of a homicidal robot on the loose. 8, H, 9, I, 1, A, 12, L, 5, E. I didn't need to wait for the 24 notes of X to chime out like clockwork from the pipe to know he'd got it. I let the grill drop for a moment, flexed my weary fingers. Then, from nowhere, I began to cry. They weren't bad tears, I guess. They weren't really happy ones either. I couldn't tell you what they were. It's like when you're listening to the radio and all of a sudden a song comes on that really kind of jerks your heartstrings. And it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, but you can just feel the emotion welling up inside you like a tide. There's no stopping it. Here in Furness, there was no music, so this was our song. And it was more beautiful than anything I'd ever heard. As Z hammered out another tuneless verse, I let my body heave, warm drops of salt water dripping past my lips onto the rock. When the sobs had subsided, I wiped my eyes, even though there was nothing to see, and decoded Z's message. 7, G, 15, O, 15 again, O, 4, D, a longer pause, 20, T, 15, O, another pause, 8, 5, 1, 18, pause, then 21, hear you, good to hear you. I wanted to send back, you're not kidding, but it would have taken forever, so I settled with 21 short notes like we'd been using, then 2 longer ones. You too. I hoped he'd get it. You okay? Came his eventual reply. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, then answered with a series of strikes. GR8. Great. Sound couldn't penetrate the walls, but it seemed sarcasm could. Me too. We went on like that, without daring to stop. In a way, it was just like texting using a really ancient phone. and we quickly picked up on each other's shortcuts and abbreviations. It wasn't the easiest form of communication in the world, the simplest sentence taking minutes to hammer out. But that was perfect. It kept our minds occupied far longer than a spoken conversation would. Each tap was like the seconds ticking by on a clock, and it forced time back into the room, brought us back to reality. We could hear the minutes passing, our conversations literally devouring the hours. I replayed Z's messages in his own voice, although surprisingly, I couldn't remember exactly what it sounded like. I knew his accent though, and after we'd been talking for a while, it was like he was right there next to me, speaking in my ear. "Been to the toilet yet?" he asked, his taps becoming words. "Yeah, but I took the grill off first." "Lucky you, I've still got my own crap on my fingers." I laughed, picturing Z's face on our first morning in Furness, when he'd been on stink duty cleaning the toilets. I could see that same gurning expression now. "Nice," I clanked. There was a pause while we both gave our tired hands a rest. Then Z started up again. "Hear that thing last night?" I didn't reply immediately. I couldn't bear to think about it, especially after finding some scrap of goodness in the hole. The memory of that creature, whatever it had been, clawing and scratching at the entrance to my cell was enough to bring the walls crashing back in, enough to make me feel all alone again. To scare the fear away, I banged out a response that I hoped would end the topic of conversation. "Just noise." "Sounded like the thing back in the cavern," he pressed. He was right, and there was no doubt in my mind it had been one of those creatures, the rats. When I didn't answer, he went on. "Think it'll come back?" "Heard shots," I said hopefully. "Must be dead." "Maybe. Thought I heard it run off." I pictured the freak running into the shadows, returning later on tonight, and decided to change the subject. "How long you think we've been here?" A pause, then the beat of his response. "Dunno. A day?" "Only 29 left to go," I replied, snorting to myself. "Like being on vacation," said Z. I laughed again, but Z's question about the rat had dredged up memories that showed no sign of departing. I picked up my grill and smashed out another sentence. "Any way to lock your hatch from the inside?" There was no response. I figured he was probably investigating his cell door before answering. Maybe he hadn't already done it. I counted the seconds, then the minutes. "You okay?" I asked. Still nothing. Something had happened. I was about to drum out another frantic message when I heard the bar on top of my hatch swivel around. The shock was so great that my stomach lurched as if on a roller coaster, and I dropped the grill, the sound lost beneath the squeal of the hinges as the trapdoor opened. Light flooded the cell like liquid fire, burning my eyes so fiercely that I doubled over and pressed my face into my hands. But not before I'd seen the hulking shape silhouetted against the inferno. 2 silver eyes glaring down at me like twin spotlights. It was a black suit. They'd heard us communicating. They were here to separate us even further, to take away the grills, or maybe just to punish us, to drag us off to the infirmary. "Bang all you like, you're not getting out," said the man. I eased my head from my arms, squinting against the glow. My heart was hammering hard enough to be heard through the wall, but I forced myself to look up, the blurred shadow of the man hanging over me like a storm cloud. "What?" I asked. "Don't let me stop you, though," he boomed, half words, half laughter. "The more you wear yourselves out, the worse it will get." He moved, his hand flashing into my cell like lightning. I ducked, feeling something crash down on top of me, all sharp edges. Hot liquid was running down my face, and I thought it was blood, but then it dripped into my mouth, and I recognised the unmistakable texture of slop. The almost inedible puree of skin, bones, guts, and offal that passed for food in this place. I get to eat?" I asked, genuinely surprised. I don't quite know how I thought we were going to survive for a month without rations of some kind, but the last thing I'd expected was to be fed. "Enjoy," said the suit as he closed the hatch, laughing again at the comical expression I must have been wearing. "You're not getting any more for another 2 days. Visitors. Okay. We can do this. I don't know which was better. The fact that I had something to eat, or the fact that we'd already been in here for 2 days. Luckily, the bowl of slop had landed right side up, and with most of its contents still in place. A miracle in this place, where Murphy's Law seemed to be an official prison rule. I ate slowly, knowing that if I guzzled down the lot in one go after not eating for so long, I'd probably throw it straight back up. It wasn't much, the sawdust-flavoured gunk, even lumpier than I'd gotten used to in the trough room, but it chiselled away at the dull ache in my gut and left me feeling full. I finished the last morsel of salty goo, then licked the bowl, my stomach gurgling with satisfaction. Picking up the grill, I clanked out a message to Z. I wasn't really sure what to say, so I opened with some small talk. Yum. Best meal ever, came his reply a minute or so later. Didn't think they were going to feed us. Guess they want to keep us alive, make us suffer, he said, a sentence that seemed to take an eternity to clang out. Thought they had us then. Me too, I said. We were lucky. There was a moment of silence. I could picture Z licking his bowl with the same relish I had. Suit said it's been 2 days, I went on. Believe it? Impossible to say. Feels like forever. The guard might have been messing with our heads, but surely if he'd been doing that, he'd have told us we'd been there for a few hours rather than a couple of days. No, he'd let it slip without meaning to, trying to torture us by saying we weren't going to be fed for another 2 days, without realising he'd given us hope. Hell, if 2 days could fly by like that, filled with slow but wonderful conversation, then a month would be no trouble. Can you think of any games? I asked after another period of stillness. I Spy, he replied, making me choke with laughter. Something beginning with D? Donkeys? I beat back. No. Dog crap? Probably. Dickweeds? Nah, they've gone. More laughter. My arms were killing me where I'd been smashing the grill against the pipe, but I was having too much fun to stop. I found myself thinking back to all the car rides we'd taken as a family when I was a kid. All the times my dad had suggested playing I Spy, and I'd been too cool to go along with it. It's the best game ever, he'd say, always trying too hard. Right now, I agreed with him. Donovan, I suggested eventually, struggling to remember more words that began with D. My memories of the outside world had been fading ever since I'd arrived in Furness, starved of reference to things that I once took for granted. Sure, I still knew what ducks and daffodils and dragonflies were, but it took me a while to dredge up the images and sounds and smells and thoughts that went with the words. And sometimes I just couldn't manage it. I'd lost the memory completely. I'd never get it back. Z hadn't replied, and I wondered if he was thinking about Donovan. The very mention of his name had sparked the hallucinations again. Patches of white vapour, no more substantial than sea mist, swirled in front of my sense-starved eyes, coalescing into a vague shape before spinning out and unravelling again. Instead of fighting it, blotting it away like I had done that first hour in the hole, I let it come. Keep him busy, I see, said the image of Donovan, his skin glowing white and red and even green in places. Staying sane, yeah, I replied. Well, apart from the fact that I'm talking to a figment of my imagination again. Don't call Z that, he joked. I meant you idiot. The sound of Z's grill burst through the illusion, causing Donovan's body to explode into specks like a flock of birds startled by gunshot. The hallucination bobbed around the cell before forming on the other side of me, my old cellmate, now tiny, like he was sitting some distance away. Where do you think D is? Z asked. Right here, I thought about replying, my own words coming out of Donovan's mouth. But only the memory of him existed in my cell right now, and I was pretty sure I knew where the real version was. Infirmary, I chipped out, my ears ringing from the echoes. Gee, thanks, yelled the hallucination, wearing a frown but grinning beneath it. You could have said on a beach somewhere, eating a burger. Why have you got to imagine me in that place, you shit? Once more, that was close. Once more, Z's response chased the image away. I shook my head, attempting to clear my thoughts. It was difficult enough trying to hold two conversations at once in any situation, never mind one with a hallucination and the other with a guy on the far side of a stolid stone wall using a toilet grill and an alphabetic code. I hope not, was all his hammer blows said. This time, when Donovan reformed, he was right next to me. Donuts, he said. I looked at him, though through him really, as his skin was almost translucent, and shrugged. He couldn't have seen it, but he was in my head, so he knew what I meant. Guess donuts, for I spy. That's stupid, I grumbled, but I tapped out the word anyway. I wish, came the chiming pulse of Z's reply. Diana Wilkes, suggested Donovan. I always wanted to ask her out, but I never had the guts. I don't think so, I said, having a flashback to school and to the girl who sat 3 seats in front of me in math, Diana Wilkes. I'd had such a crush on her, had even written her a couple of notes on postcards, but I'd never given them to her, never said anything, never would. I wondered who was sitting in my seat now, idling away the lesson by staring at the back of her neck and wondering what it smelled like. I turned back to Donovan and pretended to punch him on the arm, my hand passing right through like he was a reflection on water. That's my life you're remembering. Get your own. Pretty tough when you're made from someone else's imagination, he said. Speaking of which, I definitely had bigger arms than these. He flexed them, and the hallucination seemed to grow to ridiculous proportions. He nodded approvingly at his biceps, which now looked like 2 rugby balls beneath his glowing shirt. Happy? Much better. There was an impatient hammering from the pipe, the clangs adding up to spell, give up? Never, I replied. Dinosaurs. No. Drive-in movie theatre, an answer that seemed to take about an hour and left me with a blister at the base of my thumb. No. It's darkness, said Donovan in my head. The answer is darkness. He can't see anything in there. Duh, I said, turning to scowl at him. I know that. I was dragging the game out, having a bit of fun. Way to kill the buzz. Sorry, the apparition muttered. Then he looked up at me, eyes shining like pearls in the ocean. Dogs. What's the point? I answered, putting on a mock pout. You've already ruined the game. No, listen, he said. Dogs. A growl, like jet engines above my head, then the unmistakable bark of one of the warden's mutts. Donovan vanished, and I shot to my feet, standing on tiptoes and cocking my ear as close to the hatch as possible. Z had obviously heard it too, as there wasn't the slightest sound from the toilet pipe. I didn't hear the dog again, but I could make out the sound of feet on the rock above. It was only a whisper, but they must have been moving fast and hard to have produced any sound in here at all. I held my breath, becoming absolutely silent except for the stammer of my pulse. There was a voice, too deep to make any sense of, but obviously urgent. It sounded like an order being given. The footsteps faded, then broke off completely as a muted shot rang out. It was the same thing I'd heard the other night, but softer this time, which meant further away. 2 more followed, so close they were almost a single sound. There was a scream, as faint as a fingernail, scraping glass. Then that too died away. I had the grill poised above the pipe to make sure Z was okay when the screech came again. This time it was right above my hatch. The lever grated as it was pushed around, the sound of nails or claws on the metal making my scalp shrink. I dropped the grill, reaching up and trying to find something, anything to grip. There was a slight lip around the circumference of the hatch, barely enough for me to hook my fingers into. I grabbed it as best I could, practically hanging from it to stop it from opening. The pressure in the cell changed as the seal was broken, my ears popping so hard I was deaf. I swallowed to clear them, but instantly wished I hadn't, as the creature outside the hole screamed again. It was a noise of pure rage, so demonic that every muscle in my body lost its strength. It was all I could do to hang on as I felt the hatch shift, something tugging at it from the other side. It lifted, enough to let in a crack of blood-coloured light. I screwed my eyes shut, wrenching the hatch back down. One of my hands slipped off, but the other held firm, the steel slamming closed with a jolt that could have torn out my spine. Another shriek, the scrabbling of frenzied claws on metal. Again, the hatch was forced upwards, this time far enough for me to catch a glimpse of whatever was outside. Flesh, the same colour as the walls, limbs too swollen to be human. But whatever it was, had feet, broken and misshapen, yes, but other than that, no different from mine. "Leave me alone!" I howled, the words distorted by my sobs. It only seemed to make the creature more furious, and the hatch was torn up a little further. This time a hooked hand slipped through, the nails sharpened into claws, gripping the edge. It pried the door open a fraction more. Another few centimetres and it would be able to flip it all the way over, leaving me exposed. I dug my fingers in so hard I felt a nail snap. Ignoring the pain, I jerked my body down again and again, and by some miracle, each time I did it, the sliver of light breaking through the gap got smaller and smaller. The thing unleashed a gargled roar of defiance, but its strength seemed to be fading. With a crunch, the hatch slammed shut, trapping its fingers. Another cry, this one filled with pain rather than anger, and all too human for it. The creature was cut off mid-scream. 1 second it was thrashing, trying to free its hand. The next there was a dull snap, and it fell silent. I pushed its fingers through the gap, desperate to close the hatch before anything else tried to find a way in. They slid out with the sickening sound of grating bones, and I was plunged into the welcoming darkness. I couldn't lock the hatch from inside. I was just grateful it was shut. But my gratitude didn't last long. Before I could suck in a breath, the hatch burst open, and I didn't even have enough air to scream with as a pair of bloody hands ripped me from my cell. Okay. I'll stop there for today. The next chapter is called Snatched, as indeed he has been. Okay. I might get through 3 tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. I'll see how I'm feeling. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry, I'm so tired. Yeah, I'll catch you tomorrow. Unless I'm like too ill. But I'll be fine. I've got Lemsips. I'll be fine. I'm just making a fuss. So yeah, I hope you're okay. And I will see you tomorrow. Have a lovely day.